I watched the news for us. We're going to talk about hacking attempts on both campaigns, that Trump-Musk conversation, both candidates' economic plans, reproductive choice on the ballot, and lower prescription drug costs for Medicare recipients. So 2 Fridays ago, Microsoft says that an Iranian hacking group has breached the account of a former senior advisor from a presidential campaign. Apparently, once they were in that account, they sent spear phishing emails to members of the current campaign. And if you work in IT and you want to explain what that is in the comments, please feel free. I'm sure you'll do it better than I can. Then the next day, the Trump campaign announced that they had been hacked, but that only publicly available information had been obtained. Then we find out that a source calling himself Robert has been sending a series of internal campaign documents from the Trump campaign to the Washington Post, the New York Times, and Politico. Apparently, amongst those documents is a 271-page briefing on J.D. Vance's potential shortcomings as a public figure that was prepared before he was cast as Trump's running mate, as a sort of like vetting process document. Now, did that document predict the couch memes? We may never know, because none of the news sources that have received these documents have published them. One of the Trump campaign's official spokespeople said these documents were obtained illegally by foreign sources hostile to the United States, and that they're attempting to sow chaos in our democratic process, and then anybody who publishes them is helping them sow chaos into our democratic process. Do you guys remember 2016?
WikiLeaks. I love WikiLeaks. These WikiLeaks, as confirmed just today by WikiLeaks.
It's been amazing what's coming out on WikiLeaks. They want to distract us from WikiLeaks.
The wonder of WikiLeaks.
Anyway, Politico has said that when they asked Robert where he got these documents from, he said, "I suggest you don't be curious where I got them from. Any answer to that question could compromise me and also legally restricts you from publishing them." And then on Wednesday, Google put out a report that said that they had detected efforts from Iran to hack both campaigns, which does give credence to the Trump campaign's claim that it was in fact an Iranian group who had hacked them. On Monday, Donald Trump made his official return to X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. He did this because that evening, he and his new friend Elon were having a live conversation via X Spaces. I actually did a whole summary of this earlier in the week that you can check out if you've got a macabre interest in the two of them, but here are the highlights. Perhaps most notably, it started almost 45 minutes late. I had to try several times, like everyone who was trying to listen to this, several times to get into the space where the conversation was happening. And then when I was in the space, there was just like elevator holds, you know, the music that I'm talking about, for several minutes. Then that was followed by several minutes of silence before the conversation actually began. Musk then said that he totally tested this and it should have worked, and he blamed the whole situation on a DDoS attack. Lots of people in my comment section were questioning the validity of that claim, and I'm not going to pretend to have an official answer here, but it is true that he gutted much of his engineering workforce, and that I'm not surprised that his platform might be either faltering or failing to defend itself. Also up for debate in that comment section was whether or not Trump's very prominent lisp was due, as I had proposed, to sound issues or to denture issues. Most people thought it was denture issues. And before we completely move on from the time issue of it all, I think it's worth remembering that 2 weeks ago, whatever, in the recent past, Donald Trump had a conversation with the National Association of Black Journalists that started late. He was on stage with 3 women who he criticized repeatedly for allowing the event to start late, because apparently the sound issues were on them. And then when Musk's event started late, he praised him, saying that that's just a sign of how successful the platform is, that it isn't working. Which, you know, if you ever needed a microcosm for how the Republican Party contextualizes white men versus black women, there it is. I'd say that one big takeaway from the conversation is that both men believe in radical deregulation of industry, ostensibly so that the government can focus all of its energy on deporting people. Another is that Musk wants a job cutting government jobs in the Trump administration, which, look, I know that political donations often come with expectations, but the way that he brings it up and asks multiple times throughout the conversation, it just feels very public, very brazen, not very demure. My favorite repercussion of the conversation is that like 3/4 of the way through, Trump starts praising Musk for firing striking workers at a Tesla plant during a conversation about how like important brutal management styles are, and Musk heartily like laughs and accepts the praise. And then the next day, the United Auto Workers Union filed charges with the National Labor Relations Board because you actually aren't allowed to threaten to fire workers for striking. That's illegal. Now, before you get all rugged individualist on me, let's take a second to remember the things that unions have given us: workers' comp regulations, child labor laws, the Family and Medical Leave Act, the 40-hour work week, etc. It might be worth noting that Tesla's factory workers are not unionized, but they did benefit when they received a pay bump from Tesla in response to the United Auto Workers Union negotiating pay increases with Ford, GM, and Stellantis. Now, that being said, their base pay remains lower than their unionized counterparts. In the days since this conversation, Donald Trump has been using X to ask for money and to post AI-generated videos of himself dancing with Elon Musk. Also this week, both candidates gave speeches intended to detail their plans for the economy. I watched both speeches. One of them was 75 minutes long and not really about the economy. Can you guess whose it was? That's right, it was Donald Trump's. He actually said several times at the beginning of the speech that people keep telling him that the economy is the most important issue in the election this year and that he doesn't really think that it is, but he's here to give this speech anyway. Donald Trump did accuse Kamala Harris of like stealing his platform and said that she was probably waiting to announce her economic plan until he announced his so that she could steal it. So maybe that was it. Maybe he was trying to foil her supposed plot, and that's why he didn't really present a plan. He did spend a lot of time complaining about the fact that he doesn't get to run against Joe Biden anymore, claiming that he didn't get enough credit for how well he thinks he handled COVID, lying about illegal immigrants and making transphobic remarks. So he hit all the classics. He even used his "you're fired" line, begging the question, are the producers of The Apprentice to blame for all of this? He did hit on the economy a little bit. He stood in front of a banner that said no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, and he promised there would be an economic boom on day one of his presidency. He said he would just instruct his staff to end inflation. And he pulled up a guy from the audience who is apparently like a big investor on Wall Street, but like not one of the ones you heard of, or maybe someone has heard of. I hadn't heard of him. It just seemed like a guy who he pulled up from the audience and he was like, hey, Scott, tell them how good my plan is. And Scott was like, yeah, I think his plan is good. And that was, I guess that's how you get to 75 minutes of speech. After promising to end inflation, he did propose a tariff on all imported goods, which, historically not the move when you're trying to lower consumer prices. Kamala's speech was much more palatable in length. It was about the length of like one episode of a sitcom. She's proposing a federal ban on price gouging at grocery stores, noting that supply chains have mostly recovered post-pandemic and that retailers are not passing those savings on to consumers. In fact, they're making record profits. Do I know how this would work? No, but I like it in concept. She also proposed the building of 3 million more homes, a $25,000 subsidy for first-time home buyers, and a $6,000 child tax credit during the first year of a newborn's life. And now I'm sure we'll see the same people who don't mind the government bailing out the billionaires who run airlines and banks, saying that this is socialism or communism or whatever word sounds buzziest at the moment. Arizona and Missouri join the states that will have reproductive freedom on the ballot this year. In Arizona, there is a bill on the ballot that would allow for abortions up to fetal viability, generally interpreted as 23 or 24 weeks into a pregnancy, with exceptions for later in the pregnancy should the health of the mother be in danger. In Arizona, abortions are currently protected up to 15 weeks, and a new ballot measure would allow them to be protected up to 24 weeks. And in a very real sense, this issue is on everyone's ballot. If you want to see federal legislation protecting the right to choose, you need to vote for Democrats at the House and the Senate so they can pass it. And you need to vote for Kamala Harris so she can sign it. And if that all sounds too optimistic for you, at the very least, you need to vote against Donald Trump having the ability to appoint any more Supreme Court justices, because that is how we got here. And finally, we're going to end on the super sexy topic of Medicare. and drug prices. 2 years ago, the Inflation Reduction Act capped the price of insulin for those on Medicare at $35 a month and also created a framework for the federal government to negotiate costs on other prescription drugs provided via Medicare. On Thursday, the Biden-Harris administration announced lower prices on 10 medications that they were able to negotiate with this new framework. These new prices will officially go into effect in 2026, and the administration estimates that seniors will save $1.5 billion in out-of-pocket costs that year. They also estimate that had these prices been in effect last year in 2023, the government would have saved $6 billion. I was going to rattle off a list of the affected medications here, but I am not confident in my ability to pronounce all their names. They treat things like heart disease, diabetes, blood clots, psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, and a bunch of other common conditions. Will we see more lower costs like this in the future? That kind of depends. The Inflation Reduction Act does give the government the power to continue negotiating drug costs down for those on Medicare. Kamala Harris has said that she will continue doing this and has indicated that she will also try and lower drug costs for people who aren't on Medicare. Project 2025 has advocated for the repeal of the Inflation Reduction Act, meaning that Donald Trump, the supposed brilliant negotiator, will likely not engage in this process. Big Pharma is not happy about this. They have filed lawsuits. They've complained that these new prices do not reflect the economic value that they imposed on these drugs. But they've also told their investors that they're doing fine, because they are. They're still making lots of money.